Hey everyone, welcome back to the arena. I'm MD, joined here by Covey, and once again, a really special guest that we can't wait to delve into. But before that, just love and appreciation to those that continue to show the same to us.
What's going on, guys? Matt here. Very excited to announce another special guest that we've got with us. This is Case Kenny. Case is the author of multiple books, and he's also the podcast host of New Mindset Who Dis. And Case is actually grew up in Chicago as well, has now made it down south to some warmer weather. Which I can't blame him one bit for. But in any event, Case, first of all, thank you so much for coming on here and giving us you being so generous with your time. But why don't you just provide kind of a background of, who is Case Kenny?
For sure. Yeah, and thanks for having me, guys. I always joke any opportunity to talk about myself is one that I generally take, so appreciate that. I'll give the quick synopsis. So I'm 35. I think, I joke, I say that I share my feelings for a living. That is my career title right now. And as much as it is kind of a joke, it is pretty emblematic of what I actually do physically, practically. I'm an author. I host a podcast on SiriusXM called New Mindset Who Dis. I've created products. I consult. I do a lot. Really, my passion, though, is that of mindfulness. And I bring that to life in the form of the podcast, in the form of writing. A lot of people know me on Instagram from these quotes that I write. I work a lot with artists and DJs and producers to bring mindfulness elements to their music and introduce their music to mental health contexts. So really, what I do is mindfulness. I bring it to life as many different ways as possible. I make it as practical and simple as possible, and of course, do it for the purposes of bettering our mental health. I think quick story-wise, as far as getting here, so I went to Notre Dame. I majored in Chinese, which is random, and never, ended up doing that full time, which is fine and great. Moved to Chicago in 2011, back to Chicago rather in 2011, and eventually got into advertising. Eventually got into selling advertising technology. Did that for about 8 years, and my evolution as a person, as a man, by doing sales was really beneficial. I always joke that sales made a man out of me. In a good way, not like in a toxic man way, but it just gave me confidence. It gave me worldview. It gave me assertiveness. It gave me all these things that sales can give you. And there's a certain point in 2018, I was about to turn 30, where I was like, man, I really like who I am in my career. Like, I like Case. I started as an account executive. I left as a regional vice president. I was like, this is cool. Like, I learned how to make money. I learned how to build a Rolodex. I learned how to entertain clients. I learned how to do all these things. But then I was like, but there's kind of a disconnect here between who I am on the outside and who I am on the inside. On the inside, I was like, I don't know. I felt anxious. I felt rushed. I felt borrowing goals, timelines, all these different things. And I was kind of frustrated by the fact that I was kind of two different people, outside and inside. And my solution to that was I started the podcast. I was like, I just want to bring those two people closer together. So I'm the same person at all times, and I feel good about it. Basically that's how everything started. I started the podcast in 2018. And it kind of got popular quickly and then really doubled down over the course of COVID. And then I created a journal, wrote some books, and then social media blew up, and then Sirius picked up the pod. But really the whole timeline there is really just reflective of doing this thing on the podcast where I would sit down and ask myself questions. Why do I feel a certain way? What is the meaning of life? And I would force myself to have a perspective on the topic in the form of I believe this because this. What is the proof of what I believe? And break down my beliefs or affirm my beliefs. And really what I realized through that process is I was practicing mindfulness. I was practicing the art of putting my feelings on trial in a compassionate way. And not giving advice necessarily, not saying this is right and this is wrong, just here is what I've come to believe because of XYZ. And really that's the short version. And now here I am. Eventually, obviously I left that job and I do this full time. And it's just a continued labor of love around the passion of mindfulness, of bringing that to life in different ways and different mediums, and talking about it in a really practical way. I don't have a background clearly in this. I'm not a trained psychologist or social psychologist or anything like that. It's all about what I've learned and how I can translate it into simple terms that we can all rally around. So that's the long of the short.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, what drove that passion for increased self-awareness of mindfulness? Did that stem from just like a struggle with your mental health at some points in life, and like feeling disconnected from yourself and trying to figure out, why you were feeling the way you were. Where did the strength come from to be so open, like, about your feelings? I'm just trying to get a better sense of like where this passion for really just like self-care, self-awareness, like where it all stemmed from.
I mean, I think it came from the place of, before I worked in sales, I would consider myself pretty timid, pretty introverted previously. Something about getting into sales changed me as a person in many different great ways, and I developed into this type A person, both in good and bad. Like, I would try to control things I couldn't control, but for the most part, I really liked it. I was like, man, I could start at zero and build. I can be uncomfortable but still succeed. I could do all these things and prove to myself my power. So I really liked that about myself. But I didn't like the fact that I would feel certain ways and ignore them. And I think the idea of being a salesperson really helped me in that sense, where it's like, when your career, when you're faced with a frustration or something, you figure it out. You just do it. You just figure it out. You don't back up and say, forget about it. Otherwise, you're going to fail. You're not going to hit your quota and all these things. So I think that mentality really honestly, it was just fired me up. I was just really fired up to like not ignore things. The idea of being dishonest with myself really fired me up, and I just didn't want to ignore things. I wouldn't necessarily say I was like in a dark place or anything. It was just that matter of, feeling so good in my career, but not so great in my personal life, and wanting to be the same person and never wanting to be one person in this context, another in this context, biting my tongue, being a different version of myself. So really it came just from a place of being fired up to want to be the same person. And then, I really just came to realize the value of like being all in on a motivation. Like, I joked, I share my feelings for a living, but really that is what I do. I just literally share my feelings. I was like, what would be emblematic of someone who is honest with themselves and is the same person on the inside and out? Well, it's someone who shares their feelings, and not in like a sappy way, but who's just freaking honest. So I just found the best way to become that person was to embrace that identity, albeit a little hyperbolic with the shares his feelings for a living. But I was like, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to be that person inside out, writing, online, offline. So I do owe a lot to sales. I don't really talk a lot about that, but now that I'm thinking about it out loud, I think a lot of it just came from that place of just being kind of fired up.
I'm sure he can relate. The guy sitting next to me on that.
Yeah, I got 20 questions. Well, first, is as you started to learn more about mindfulness, learn more about your other self, if you will, and started to bring the other two closer together, I ask this question from a place of being a sales coach and always pushing my folks to work on themselves outside of their sales craft and really work on that second self that you're alluding to. So I'd love to just hear from your perspective, potentially even, how did working on yourself outside of your sales career then reward or impact or serve your sales career? Did you notice an increase in your performance? Did you notice increased happiness in the workplace? And then at some point, it sounds like you moved away from that. So I'd just love to hear, for the brief time that you stayed in sales, how that might have served you.
Yeah, it definitely served on both sides. So it definitely served me in my personal life, to my whole ramble there. But yeah, I mean, on the reverse end, I mean, it really helped me, my whole journey into mindfulness really helped me evolve what my purpose in life was. Like, before, it was like, I want to be happy, I want to be successful. But from there, it evolved. Because of this lens of mindfulness, it evolved into, I want to be proud of myself and I want to be honest with myself. And in my personal life, that changed everything, of course, right? That's the key to, calming your anxieties and controlling what you can control and moving at your own pace. And in my relationships, communicating and being honest and being proud of my actions, but right back into my career as well. I mean, I think for one, in sales, like, salespeople are human, and I think it really helped humanize me in my sales career. I stopped being a hokey, sales guy, and it became a human with feelings and emotions, and I think that really helped ingratiate myself because it was real and it was raw. And also, the whole idea of like making my goal in life, I just want to be proud of myself. Well, when that's your goal, your actions follow. And, I want to be proud of myself in my career too. So like in my sales career at the time, being proud of myself meant going above and beyond, like being a good leader, being a follower when it came to be a follower, like being a leader when it came to be a leader. So I think it really just helped align my actions both personally and in my career, and just having a sense of calm and a world view. Like it's so easy in your careers to be rushing and then blink your eyes and you're 35 or you're 40 and you're like, man, I've just been following a blueprint as opposed to maybe creating my own or developing myself. So yeah, it all flows together for sure.
And I'm a visual learner, so examples help me in a sense that, like, what do you mean when you say like I'm more honest with myself? Like it sounds good on paper. Everyone would probably subscribe to, like, I would love to be honest with myself. Why wouldn't I be? But like, why is that more difficult than initially perceived? Or like, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, I think it means a lot of things. I think for me, it's the whole idea of like doing things that look good to other people or feel good to myself, and not feel good in like a hedonistic negative way, but I think a lot of times in life we are just doing things that look good on paper. We're living life for other people, we're following blueprints because that's what you do, versus I've taken the time to realize that this is right for me and this is not right for me. That of course is what it means to be honest with yourself. And I wrote this book earlier this year called That's Bold of You, which is basically the idea of like reinventing yourself in light of honesty. And it started with the whole idea, there's this whole psychology around something called mimetic desire, mimetic theory, which is basically the idea that we're all copying other people in life, which is fine. There's a lot of writings, Rene Girard. There's a book called Wanting by Luke Burgess, which is really good, which is it basically says like there's very few things in life that we say we want that didn't start with mimicking other people in some way. And so being honest with yourself is saying, okay, for a while I've been saying I want this thing. Let me prove to myself that I actually want it. Not because I think it's what's expected of me, not because I think it will make me happy, but I know it will because of X, Y, Z. So really I think being honest with yourself is collecting proof in the form of memories and actions and experiences that say this thing is actually real and right for me. So I think a lot of the process of being honest with yourself is mindfulness. Mindfulness is putting your emotions, your feelings, your aspirations on trial and saying, okay, is this what I truly want? And then proving it to myself. So really that's the idea of self-honesty.
Yeah, no, I love every bit of that. And then maybe like on the flip side, because I'm kind of experiencing this real time, so I'm actually curious to get your thoughts, but like talk about maybe some of the challenges that come with that come with being honest with yourself, that come with reinventing yourself. Because for me personally, like there has been some like sense of loneliness at times. Like this is not the path that's traveled by most people. Setting boundaries for yourself, distancing yourself from people that like no longer serve you, from groups that no longer serve you, from environments that no longer serve you. I'm just curious for your thoughts there. Been like, I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it was just one of those things where it's like, wow, this is sometimes pretty lonely, like, self-love and self-care and putting yourself that ultimately feels right to you, not, again, to your point, like what society's telling you should do or what should be fun or types of people you should be around with, but like who actually fills you up, in the deepest sense.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points there. The first is a point about starting over, and the second is a point about loneliness. I think on the first point, and they're obviously closely related, when you start acting on honesty with yourself and you're like, oh man, I'm 35, for instance, and I just decided that I'm starting a new career, or I just broke up with my girlfriend of 5 years and I'm starting over again, or whatever it may be, radical big changes that you introduced into your own life because you decided you wanted something different. There's a lot of fear associated with that, of course, right? Practically, pragmatically, financially, the whole thing. On an inner level, I think we are very resistant to change born of honesty because of this idea of starting over. Even just the words starting over, like we think the idea of starting over, whether it's starting a new career, a new town, a new city, a new dating, whatever, we tend to think of starting over as the worst case scenario. That starting over is reflective of you messed up so bad that you have to go all the way back to zero and start over. And I think there's very few scenarios where that's actually true. I think the reality of starting over is that you're getting closer to what you want, not further away from it. And I think that changes a lot because, again, when we think of starting over, we tend to think of, oh God, I got to start over, which means I got pretty close to what I wanted and then started over. So now I'm going all the way back. I'm getting further from what I want in life. I think it's the entirely opposite. When you have enacted a measure of honesty with yourself and you're starting over and your actions are following, you're getting closer. Logically, you're getting closer because you've decided that what you previously wanted is not what you want any longer. And since you're moving away from that, just logically, it means you're moving closer to what you do want. You're moving away from what you've decided you don't want. And that is so powerful. And so intrinsically, compassionately, it means you're moving closer to what you do want. So I think that it's hopeful to realize that. And we can go down the whole rabbit hole of you're never starting from zero, you're always starting from experience and the whole idea of what you're bringing with you and yada yada. But I think for one, it's helpful to realize that you're moving closer, not further from what you want when you start over. And then along the lines of feeling lonely, there's different kinds of loneliness, right? There's loneliness where you're in a relationship with someone, but you feel misunderstood and you're alone. There's physical loneliness when you're in a city and you don't have any friends. Many different kinds of loneliness. There's also that kind of loneliness where you don't feel connected to something, right? You don't have that thing, or you feel like you're chasing it and you can't quite find it. And we tend to really, really beat ourselves up for that, right? And I think we need to take a step back and really realize what loneliness in that sense means, right? There's social loneliness, which is also rolled up into this, but the idea of not feeling connected, I think I don't want to say a good sign, because of course we would rather not feel it, but it is a sign that your search for that thing that you've decided you want and is eluding you, but you want it, your search for it is still intact. There's a quote from Martha Beck, who's a Harvard sociologist and author, and she said that loneliness is a sign that your innate search for connection is still intact. And I've always carried that with me, because if you contrast that with what I think is more common, which is you feel lonely again, it starts to really eat at you. Most people respond to loneliness by lowering their bar and saying, okay, well, this is good enough. Let me get rid of the loneliness. I'll date the first person I see. I'll start liking fantasy football, even though I can care less. I'll start hanging out with these people, even though they're not my friends. Anything to get this loneliness off my back. Most people, I would say, respond to loneliness by lowering the bar to allow for some kind of connection in their life, where deep down they know it's not the right connection, but they'll do it anyway. So I think if you're still feeling lonely, that means there is a sense of strength in that it's saying you're still fighting, you're still searching for this thing. You haven't lowered the bar. And I am a delusional optimist, and I think, not everyone needs to be, but I think a lot of the way that we can rationalize hope and forward progress is by grasping some of these concepts or affirming them in our own lives, instead of doing what we do so well as humans, which is thinking starting over means I messed up so bad. Loneliness means that I'm a loser and I'm never going to get to what I want. We could think that, or we could open our hearts a little bit more compassionately and say, no, this is what it means, and here's what I believe. So, long-winded answer, but I tend to think that way, and it really helps kind of deliver me from some of that more negative human thinking.
Yeah, and I like the piece towards the end around, like, people often join different clubs, whatever they think is going to give them that sense of connection. But what I realized in my life is when I would do that, it actually led to more disconnection from myself, and I really quickly lost this sense of self and who I was, because here I am just stretching all into different areas of my life of things that I think are going to give me a sense of connectedness with people, and I was ultimately more disconnected with myself than I'd ever been. I'm curious on your relationship with, we talk about self-honesty and ways to be honest with yourself, and that it is difficult, one, to just the strength to do it, but like, what is your relationship with like meditation, and how has that served you in terms of getting, still, you mentioned calmness a lot. Just talk about your relationship with meditation.
Well, I would say it's not great, to be honest with you. Like, I don't really meditate in the traditional sense. Like, I am not the guy to sit down, put on some spa music, and just be and clear my mind. For two reasons. For one, I'm not very good at it, and I know that's a horrible answer for anyone who knows meditation, because
what they say about what they say, the people that say they're not good at it are the ones that could benefit from it the most.
Exactly. And meditation, the benefit of meditation comes from practicing it and practicing and practicing it. So that's why there's a huge asterisk there. So say that half joking. But I gravitate towards a variety of meditation that works for me, no practice required. And that's a very kinetic upbeat meditation. And so it is meditation, right? Most people think of meditation, they think about very slow, very quiet. You calm your mind, you don't move, whatever. My type of meditation is I amp it up. I amp up the BPM. I want my heart rate jacked. I like to move. So for me, like I mentioned, I do a lot in music and work with DJs and producers where it's 128 BPM. It's Martin Garrix, and we're jamming and we're doing music and we're moving. For me, it puts me in a vulnerable headspace, and I feel unlike any other experience I've been in. And not like, fake feelings, just like euphoric because you're listening to dance music. But, there's a lot of connection between mind and body, and there's these, they call them happiness molecules when your muscles are contracting and moving, and there's, some, potential fairy dust neuroscience there. But for me, I always feel in that vulnerable headspace when I'm listening to upbeat music. Moving is great, but upbeat music always does it for me. That is my meditative state. I gravitate towards dance music a lot because of the structure: break, build, drop, very euphoric, melodic, climactic. But for me, that's kind of how I meditate. It also goes closely, I journal a lot. So like for me, meditating and journaling, it's kind of like one and the same. I like to put myself in a headspace where I'm vulnerable and honest, and then I really like to write it down. That forces me to really make it real. So that's my answer. It's somewhere between traditional meditation and kind of, whatever you want to call it.
And then talk to me just really quickly about that for the guys that are like, for men that are like, well, journaling, I would, that's not, manly, and talk to me about that. I'm not, I'm not saying I'm not one of those people. Yeah. I journal, but I used to certainly be. I used to have that mindset, and it, after actually doing it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like so therapeutic. But I just would love to hear your response to that.
And I used to feel that way too. So, I think it's two things. For one, journaling is not a diary. It's not something you do when you're sad. It's not something you do only when you're sad, only when you're overwhelmed. I think about it in two ways. The first is, in life, we write important things down. Like, if you have an important math problem, you're going to write it down. If you have an important number you need to memorize, a to-do list, you're going to write that shit down. That's what we do with important things in life. Life decisions. If you have an important life decision where you're like, oh my gosh, should I move across the country to accept this job? I don't know about you, but I'm inclined to write. I'm gonna write a pros and cons list down. I'm gonna do a little T and do a pros and cons for big life decisions. So for the most part, I'd say we agree that important things we write down. I don't know why we don't write our thoughts down, just along the same logical vein. Like, why don't we? It is not only is there more neuroscience behind mind and body connection and writing things down and making the thought real and visual. We're visual people. But there is just power in taking something in your head and making it real. Because that's the problem. When we keep things in our head, they're not real to us, and they're very easy to slide under the rug. So that's just the way that I logically dip my toe into journaling. Number two is, I'd say we also agree in life that one of the purposes of life, if we were to sit down and say, what is the purpose of life? We can come up with some very poetic answers. One of the simplest ones I'd say we could all agree on is in the top 5, is the purpose of life is to go out and find answers. Sure, right? You grow up, in your 20s, your 30s, you go out, you're a sponge, you find answers that are true to you. But we forget that the only way to find answers is to ask yourself questions. You could be a sponge for experiences, but unless you're analyzing those experiences with questions, you're not going to find an answer. Answer, question, answer, question. Journaling is the simplest way to ask yourself questions, specifically hard-hitting, powerful, personal questions. So that is the power of journaling. Journaling, there's many different kinds of journaling, and I think the wrong kind can really dissuade you from journaling a lot. Like a form of journaling that says, all right, write down 3 things you're grateful for every day, write down a to-do list, and then come back and, there's productivity journaling, there's gratitude journaling. I think those are fine. I think the best form of journaling is the one that I gravitate towards and create my journals around, is just very hard-hitting, bespoke questions where there's no pressure to give rhetoric like, I'm grateful for my health, I'm grateful for friends. Like, that's great, but it gets performative and you don't get value from it. You're just saying what sounds good. What is the value of that? Value of journaling is cracking yourself open and getting real with yourself and being like, whoa, Like that was a tough question. I had never thought of that. My answer feels okay, but I had never thought about that. It doesn't need to be poetry, but like that is the value of journaling. So I don't know if that's a masculine answer or not, but for me, it's like, why wouldn't I do those things? If the purpose of life is to find answers, why wouldn't I ask myself questions? And journaling is not something you only do when you're sad. It's something you do to celebrate. It's something you do to track and evolve and all these things. So that's kind of how I look at it. I believe that.
It genuinely motivates me right now to go and like want to journal because it just sounds fun. If you wouldn't mind, and maybe the listeners feel the same way, like what are maybe 1 to 3, just a handful example of these bespoke, hard-hitting questions that would be a good place to start?
Yeah, I mean, I've written hundreds of prompts. The one that I always come back to, which is one that I really like people to start with, is actually kind of borrowed from habit formation communities of the idea of fill in the blank. I'm the kind of person who, and then you fill in the blank. But specifically, you fill in the blank with verb statements. Back to my previous comment about most of us say that we want to be happy in life. I want to be happy in life. There's a lot of problems with a statement like that. To give yourself direction and to give yourself credit for what you're doing, we need to focus on verbs. So I like the journal prompt. I'm the kind of person who, and say, for instance, you want to be happy. Well, what are the verbs that would make you happy? So not only are you giving yourself a blueprint in journaling, you're sitting down and being like, well, I say I want to be happy, but what would I need to do to actually be happy? And 2, you're also giving yourself a little bit of credit. I think we're very dismissive of the pride we should have in ourselves. Well, here's the things I'm doing that make me happy, and I should give myself credit for them. Or successful, or whatever the adjective is that you're kind of chasing. So I like that as a starting blueprint for journaling, because it gives you a blueprint forward and also some credit in the present, and it requires you to kind of be honest with yourself. Because again, I think journaling that is good. All journaling is good, but the kind of journaling that kind of keeps you in place is the kind of just rhetoric journaling. What are you grateful for? How are you feeling? What would make you happier? Like, I think we really need to get more creative with cracking at what is underneath those questions. But the danger of wellness is repeating cliches that you haven't driven into yourself and saying the same thing over and over again, hoping that it will represent how you actually feel. So we really need to crack into that. And, for sake of one example, I would say I'm the kind of person who is one of my more favorite journal exercises. I'll give you one more, actually. I led a journaling session the other week, and I like this one a lot. There's one that I call, what is it? I forget what I called it, but I call it whatever. The enemy of myself is so-and-so. There's that phrase that's like, the best revenge in life is to not be like your enemy. And for some reason, I've always hung on to that phrase. So I have this journal exercises where I have people describe their enemy, and encouraging people in the sense of your enemy likely, we're not talking about like people you hate or whatever. We're talking about your enemy likely represents all of the opposite things that you stand for, all the things that you've worked so hard to overcome and to be. That is your enemy, and you're the opposite of that person. So I encourage people to write out who their enemy is. For me, the enemy of Case is someone who's dishonest, doesn't do what he says he's going to do, is not kind to others, doesn't give people respect, so on and so forth. And the point of that, again, is to say, okay, this is your enemy. You are not that person. Can we find pride in who you are not? And can we also find some clarity around some of the more things you could do to avoid being the person that you said you don't want to become? So things like that, just little different kind of wordplay to get into a headspace where you're really thinking about who you are, who you don't want to be, who you want to be, and and everything in between.
So I'm sure you have before, but I want you to now answer the first journal prompt that you gave us, which is, I am the kind of person who, like, who is Case?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I had to answer it in just one phrase, I would say I'm the kind of person who does the difficult things. That's something I'm like psychotic about. Like, my girlfriend was always making fun of me because any life difficulty or anxiety, if I was a doctor, I am prescribing you medicine that says, well, just do the difficult things and that problem will go away. I'm like a crazy person when it comes to doing the difficult things, because I think that's the answer in a lot of life's circumstances. Relationship, do the difficult thing, be honest about what you want. break up with someone if they're not right for you. In your career, of course, doing the difficult things is how you define yourself and your ability to do well. Building pride, building confidence, it's all about doing the difficult, the awkward, the embarrassing things. In your inner life, listening to how you actually feel, being willing to start over, difficult thing. So for me, it's like not masochistic, but it's like, if there's something difficult, I have to do it, because that is where the goodness and the compassion and the honesty lies. So for me, I'm the kind of person who does the difficult things, as defined by myself, of course, right? Not because climbing Mount Kilimanjaro would be difficult, but for me, I've identified the lane within which I want to operate. What are the difficult things that I need to overcome to reach that level? That is what I'll do.
And then you mentioned, I'm curious, your thought on like affirmations, just because you kind of said like, it can get, some of these journaling prompts can get performative, and like we're telling ourselves these different things. So I'm just curious your thoughts generally on like positive affirmations. Have you done them? Have your experience with them? What have you seen work with people?
Yes. I wish I could go back and edit my language there a little bit. I'm very pro affirmation. I'm very pro mantra. I'm very pro cliche. As long as it's followed by why. Like, I used to be pretty anti-cliche, especially in self-help. Like, oh, you love yourself like you love others. That's real nice. I don't know why I used to be that way. Cliches are cliches because they're true for a reason. Mm-hmm. When we dismiss cliches, it's likely out of fear. It's likely out of cynicism. It's likely out of hurt of some kind. I kind of make a living from writing cliches. If you look at Instagram, I am Mr. Cliche. I am Mr. Affirmation. But I think there's power behind them for two reasons. The first is, if I write a quote on Instagram, for instance, and that gets shared tens of thousands of times, as they all do, and someone sees it and they're like, oh, I've heard this before, but Case said it in a different way, and maybe, okay, I get it now. Like, I am all for changing people's lives. If they've heard a cliche 100 times and they see me write it 101 times and it changes their life, my mission is accomplished. And somehow that's how life is. Like, we need to hear things dozens of hundreds of times before it really clicks. So that's point one. So I think there's a tremendous value in cliches. Point two is, there's tremendous value in cliches and affirmations as long as the person saying it and receiving it has a why behind it. Like, you can say, I believe this, that, and the other. Why? When you have a why, that's the whole honesty thing we're talking about, and it makes it powerful for you. You're not just repeating it because it sounds good for other people. So I think our ability to define why, honestly, and with the word I behind the why, that's what makes any affirmation great and powerful. As long as you do define why it's true for yourself and not just a nice, lovely saying, that's what makes it great.
And so, speaking of your cliches, if you will, I wrote down one from your page, actually a couple, but one that I think has been thematic that we've talked about quite frequently has been, it's the quote that you have on your page says, it's your life, feel free to burn bridges if they're leading nowhere. And as you've talked about how you transformed as a person, Matt has talked about it, I've talked about it, there's this idea of like having to in some ways evolve your social circle, and that's like the nicest way I can put it, but we've heard phrasing as burn bridges and shedding relationships, shedding old skin, and that sounds so violent and maybe negative, but at the end of the day, like, it's meant to serve us. And I want to think about, and this is kind of like a collective question here, it's like, how do we reconcile it being for ourselves, the best for ourselves, while also it not being selfish and harmful to other people who maybe aren't ready to lose you in that type of light?
Yeah, agreed. It does sound a little savage, and that's not really my style. So, I mean, I would approach it from two perspectives. The first is, like, we need to embrace the power and the compassion of temporary relationships in life. We need to get out of our head of thinking that the only worthwhile friendship, business partnership, romantic partnership are those that are forever. I think that messes up our entire understanding of life. The only relationships, permanent relationships, aren't the only ones that are good for us. Of course. But for some reason, we tend to think that any relationship that is not permanent is a failure. And I don't, the idea of burning bridges, I think, as a cultural reference does kind of necessitate some like I'm cutting you off kind of thing. But for me, burning a bridge for me simply means you're moving on, and you could see goodness in a temporary relationship. Temporary relationships are how you end up with the perspective that you need to get to relationships that hopefully are forever. So we need to get to a mindset where we can look back on old relationships and smile and say, oh, I'm so grateful for that. Like, I hate this like cultural thing we have where it's like all of our exes are horrible and all of our former friends are horrible. It's like, sure, some of our exes and some of our friends hurt us and betrayed us, great. But why can't we look back and say, yeah, that person I dated in my 20s, yeah, we clearly weren't right for each other, but I can look back and smile on that because I don't need to go back to it to appreciate it. And same with friends. Like, I had a lot of friends from Notre Dame who I don't really talk to anymore, but I don't need to look back and say, man, I can't believe we're not friends anymore. Like, oh, they drifted apart because they didn't want to be friends with me. It's like, no, I look back and I really appreciate those people. So I think we need to give ourselves the gift of allowing ourselves to outgrow some of those relationships. The second point is, like, sometimes because we're afraid of burning bridges, we're afraid of starting over, we cling to relationships that clearly we've outgrown. They've outgrown us and we've outgrown them, but we stick together and eventually it ends in a mess. Whereas it doesn't have to, because we do this thing where if at one point a relationship was good, like admittedly it was good, it was a good relationship, but then eventually it no longer was, we get in our heads so much about thinking that good things won't happen twice in our lives. Like if we had a ride or die homie and we were friends forever, but then, life changed, different priorities, whatever. And you're like, man, well, I don't want to give up this friendship because I'll never have a friendship like that again. So I've got to cling to it. I've got to force this. That's where we end up in trouble. We have to believe that good things can happen twice, 3 times, 10 times, 100 times, of course, as long as you're willing to put in the work. But if we don't have that belief, that's how we end up hanging on to these things. And so sometimes I say brute force needed. You need to burn the bridges. And not in a negative way of like, leave me alone and block that person, but just moving on compassionately, saying I appreciate what we had, I can smile and look back at it, but I believe in goodness version 2, and I'm going to move on towards that. So I think that the balance in life is somewhere in between those two things, but I think a lot of it just comes from how we're born logically to think about good ending and then we're screwed, whereas that's just not the case as I see it.
So much good stuff. I mean, I love the simplicity of like good things can happen twice. Like that's such a powerful sentiment that can apply to so many different things. Well then, okay, like one step further then, because I can tell some of your content and cliches revolve a lot around relationship. And so I am wondering, like, because people can hear that message and then get caught up in this fad of like, I'm just going to burn bridges because it seems like the right thing to do, or like right. I want to be that person. Well, how do you know when it's a good relationship and it's one that's worth keeping around? Like, what are some of the indicators that like this isn't meant to be a bridge that's burned?
Can I take a first stab at that case?
Yeah. What is a good relationship? Holy moly. Man. Yeah, I mean, I could spend hours on that. I'm actually in the process of writing a book about that. I'll pick my favorite. I'll pick the one I'm hot on right now. And again, this is just as I live and learn. As I've learned, I'm not a relationship expert or a dating coach or anything like that. I think maybe I'll say 2 things. I think the right relationship is the opposite of one that is, I hate this term, settling down. Hate that term. I think it does a lot of disservice, particularly for men, but just in general, this idea of I'm going to settle down in life. And as much as we don't really mean it negatively, because we think about settling down as, I'm not going to have a roster, I'm not going to date, I'm going to find one person and we're going to live life together. It does this thing where a lot of men, in my experience, it freaks men out because the idea of settling down means losing your independence, maybe chasing your ambitions a little less, so on and so forth. So I like to remove this idea of settling down. And I think the right relationship, how you know it's the right relationship, is one that settles you up in the sense of giving you more life. And I know that's kind of a vague, ambiguous statement, but we need to rethink what the purpose of a relationship is in order to be able to define what a good relationship is or is not. I think the right relationship is one that gives you more life. Specifically, it makes you more independent. And I know that's like the opposite of what a lot of people think, but I think that's a core fear of a lot of people, particularly men, that a relationship is going to rob you of your independence. maybe not literal independence, but independence that says I could do this, I could chase that, so on and so forth. I think the right relationship, when you're with that person, you feel empowered to be independent. And there's something called the dependency paradox, which basically says it's a psychologist term in childhood and caregiving, where, call it a mother and a son, for instance, the closer their bond, the more dependent that son feels with his mother, the more independent he's empowered to be. Basically because he knows, my mom loves me so much, I love my mom so much that I'm willing to take a first step, fall, run, because I know she'll be there for me. Not codependent, but dependent, right? This idea that the closer you are, the more willing you are to do things outside of their purview. That's within childhood and adolescence. I think that same idea applies tremendously so to adult, mature relationships. You should feel a relationship where you have the dependency, not codependency, where you have dependency and your bond is so strong that you feel empowered to have a life outside of them, ambitions outside of them, travel outside of them, to do all these things. To me, I think that's a really strong sign that the relationship is right and is good. That's number one. Number two, I would just throw this out there because I did an episode recently. I think a lot of people are talking about this, but I did it a while back on the idea that if someone were to say you're a lot like your partner, would you interpret that as a compliment or not? I think that's a good way. That's kind of a good journal prompt, right? It's a good way to cut through the crap and you to get honest, because I think a lot in relationships, we like to pick one or two things about our partner that we really like, and then we ignore the rest. A question like that forces you to list out everything and get real about it, as opposed to living in la la land of potential this and potential that. It forces you to really get rooted in reality. So I'd say somewhere between redefining what the purpose of a relationship is, checking yourself to make sure your partner empowers that, and then two, maybe asking yourself a question that gets you out of potential and into reality with, if someone were to say you're a lot like your partner, would you see that as a compliment?
I want to hear your answer.
Well, yeah, my answer was more around... Oh, go ahead.
But and this applies. Yeah. Everything you said applies broader than just intimate relationship, by the way. Like, this can apply very equally to friendships, siblings, etc. Yep. So
Yeah. I was thinking, which, again, like you said, but for me, because I've done this, going through this more recently, but, like, it's like really taking an audit of my friendships. Like, where did they stem from? Was it when I was in high school? Am I the same person I was in high school? Did it stem from college? Like, stem from sports team I played on? And then it's like, okay, and it's like, who am I today, and who is the person that I want to be? Like, who am I striving to be? And does this relationship or does this friendship, whatever it is, does this serve me in becoming the best version of myself, or whatever that version looks like for me? And does this and then also for me, it's been really crystal clear, is like, does this person, when I'm around them, do I feel like I can be myself? And if I can't, like, ask myself why. Is it a me problem? Is it something they're doing? Right. And does this person give me energy? Or is this more of something like I feel like more drained, like it's taking me of my energy? Like, those are all the different things. And, like, if someone is giving me energy, if someone is, I feel like, challenging me to be a better version of myself, if I feel like the most authentic version of myself around these people, like, those are the people that I try to surround myself with now. Because to me now it's so crystal clear. I think some of it just stems from self-awareness of who you are, and once you feel extremely connected with yourself, I think all those things become very crystal clear. Like, who's giving me energy, who's not, all those things I mentioned. So that's kind of how I would do it. Like, I've been very intentional about, like, when did this friendship come in my life? Why? And is it still serving me? And if you can answer those three questions, I feel like you and honestly, to your point, Case, I think you can get to a good spot.
Yeah, I love that, because everything I just said is not possible unless it's preceded by what you just said. Like, in order to know what a compliment would be to you, in order to know, what you can do as an independent person, you have to know exactly what you just described. You have to have tremendous self-awareness. So I would build on that, because I'm hot on thinking about this book. One of the things that I'm really big on is, I was in LA a couple months back, and I was at Rachel Hollis's home. Rachel Hollis is an author and podcaster. She wrote that book, Girl, Wash Your Face, which is like a huge bestseller. And we were talking, and she got married real young and then got divorced, and they were married for a long time and then got divorced. And she just made this comment. She was like, yeah, and after I got divorced, then, I was considering getting back out there. She was like, I made the decision that I wanted someone to do life with, not build life with. And we glossed over that real fast. But for me, that anecdote that I don't think she realized carries so much weight changed everything. That is the purpose of a relationship. Someone to do life with, not build life with. And in order to know what doing life looks like, you have to know yourself tremendously well. You have to know what makes you happy. You have to know what makes you not happy. You have to know your dreams, your aspirations. You have to go out and form a worldview of yourself. But I think where a lot of people get in trouble, and particularly women, because women are just under different sociological, biological, generational pressure to think I've got to get in a relationship so I can finally build life. I got to have a partner so finally I can build life. And I think that is such a disservice to ourselves. The purpose should be, as cheesy as it is, here's a cliche, it's two wholes coming together, not two halves coming together, right? The best relationship is where you have lived your life. You have found what makes you happy. You're not waiting to build it with someone else.
Your
You're
cup's
not
already
waiting
full.
around for someone to give you purpose. You have gone out and figured it out for yourself so that when someone else comes along who has also done the same thing, you're building in a sense, but you're just doing life because you've already figured out the puzzle pieces and now you're doing it together. And I think that's such an empowering way to look at like the role that your independence plays both before and inside of a relationship. Like it is your obligation to figure out what makes you happy outside of a relationship. Because if you haven't figured that out, you're not going to be happy inside of a relationship. You might be for a little bit, Band-Aid solution, but you're not long-term. So it is your obligation to yourself and your future self and your future partner to figure that out now so that you guys can come together and just do life together. So I'm very hot on that lately, but I think it builds off your point nicely.
And you just destroyed a cliche in the process of like when you hear people say like, "Oh, he completes me" or "she completes me." It's like, well, that's an issue.
We like to destroy cliches from every now and then too.
That's a fun one. Well, I want to quickly react to, just kind of react to Matt's point there around how he's now seeking relationships that are settling him up, right, or serving him.
Yeah.
And when I initially heard his perspective on this, I was really toying with the phrasing of like, I'm only going to surround myself with people who, make me better or push me forward, propel me. And I said, that's not, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, that sounds amazing, but how do we do this in a way that isn't selfish, right? And then it occurred to me, I'm like, wait, no, it's not. And I think it's just now occurring to me in this conversation where it's like, by doing what Matt is describing, he's saying, filling his cup. And then I think back to advice I've given. It's like, you can't pour from an empty cup. And what that means is ultimately like, without him doing that, then he can't be his best version. And if he can't be his best version, then he can't serve others. He can't serve the other end of the relationship as best that he can. And ultimately, that's why it's so important for us, and then this is just my open-ended thought, is like, that's why it's important for us to surround ourselves with people who make us better, because the better we can be, the better friends that we can be to the other person in that relationship. So I really had to like piece this one all together, but that was, a thought process and a half for me over the course of weeks, right? And I think that's the importance of journaling full circle, is like you can really start to think this stuff through.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said is something I wholeheartedly agree with, but it could be difficult, right? Because if to your words, it feels selfish to say that, right? It's like, am I asking for too much? Am I literally being selfish? The thing, I think about relationships of all kinds, with the homies, with your romantic partner, with business partners. The right person is going to welcome a conversation like that. If you're willing to have a conversation with someone and be like, hey man, like, I feel like you're pulling me back, or I feel like we're not on the same level right now, or I feel more drained when I'm around you. Having a conversation like that isn't always about burning bridges because you feel that way. There are conversations to be had where you can elevate yourself through communication. Like I did an episode recently on like probably the hardest thing to ever say to someone in a romantic relationship, which is saying, just because you love me doesn't mean I feel loved by you. And that's freaking brutal, right? Someone is out there trying to love you. They're loving you in the way that they know how, which could be flawed. It could be just off kilter and wrong for you. But for you to sit there and say, you love me, but I don't feel loved by you. First of all, the difference between the two is the holy grail of figuring out the right relationship for you, right? Cutting through acts of love versus actually feeling loved. There's a lot there. But to the point here, it's like talking to someone and saying, hey, you're doing these things, and I know you're trying. This is the most difficult conversation ever. You're doing these things, and I know you're trying, but it doesn't make me feel loved. The right person is going to hear something like that, and they're going to say, please just tell me what makes you feel loved. I want nothing more than to make you feel loved. I'm trying. I'm operating from a place that I know, but if you can give me a hint and you can open and say, this makes me feel loved, I will do that because I want to, not performatively, but because I want nothing more than to love you in a way that makes you feel loved. Or as friends, I want nothing more than to support you and elevate you, but I just don't know how. So I think the right person, the wrong person will react to that and say, fuck you, like, blah, blah, blah. The right person is going to hear that and say, thank you. Thank you so much for telling me that, for one, I'm not doing the right thing, but for being willing to tell me what the right thing is so that I can help deliver it for you. So I think there's a lot there about, knowing what makes you feel loved, knowing what makes you feel supported, platonically, romantically, business-wise, being willing to discuss it. There's a lot of mature elements in there, but I think that builds off your point there too.
Yeah, I think what you said there is like the right person will respond to that by actually listening and with curiosity, and the wrong person is going to respond to it with judgment and taking it like extremely personal. There's a big distinction there. And I want to ask you, you mentioned a couple times about people kind of searching for happiness and like that's the purpose of life. And what is it? I think what I've realized, because I was certainly one of those people, and it's like after I worked through my self-healing, I'm like, oh my God, I got here. I must be happy for the rest of my life now. I think that's shifted a little bit more to I feel a sense of, and what I'm trying to maintain and like always striving for is a sense of inner peace. And I think you've talked about peace a little bit, and I'm just curious, like, what does it mean to you, Case, to live a peaceful life?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot of what we're discussing here. I mean, to be at peace with yourself, by logic, is to not be at war with yourself. To be at war with yourself is kind of how we opened, right? One person on the outside, one person on the inside, doing things for other people as opposed to how it feels to you. Rushing, following supposed to be timelines, all these kinds of things. Creates a war within yourself, right? It's chaos because you feel one way, but you do another. You borrow other people's goals and aspirations, all the while you have some semblance of truth inside of you. So I think to be at peace, not to repeat myself, but to be at peace is to be honest with yourself. Because I don't peace isn't the same thing as happiness necessarily. Peace isn't the same thing as successful. Peace isn't the same thing as winning, right? And I think we need to realize that, being at peace with yourself is saying, I'm honest with myself at this moment and I'm on the right track. And then also realizing like all these goals we set for ourselves, from partnership goals to money goals to body goals to health goals to confidence goals and everything in between. I think it behooves us tremendously to say, I can accrue and receive all those things. I am worthy of those things. But we also need to realize that, being happy isn't the result of having all those things in one big pile right now. Life and peace comes from saying, I am working for these things and I will appreciate each and every one as I pick it up along the way. Very rarely in life do we have everything we want all at once. And I think if we expect that, we're setting ourselves up for a life of being at war with ourselves. But if we can say each one as it comes my way, as I earn it, right? Not because it's given to me, but as I earn it, that is what gives me peace, because I'm honest with myself along the way and I appreciate it with gratitude as it comes along my way. And I think breaking things down like that kind of helps get us out of our own way, because I think that is peace. Peace is getting out of your own way, and just coming home to yourself with that element of honesty and staying focused on that.
Beautifully said. Sorry, go ahead.
No, maybe one more for me here. It's just another cliche that you had on your page, and somewhat related, I think. But it states, "At this point in my life, attention is cheap. I want connection." And I want you to just really elaborate.
I love that. Sorry, I love it.
Well, we'll read it one more time then. "At this point in my life, attention is cheap. I want connection." Can you just elaborate maybe on the quote, but also just distinguish the difference between attention and connection?
Yeah. Well, again, I think the only way to be able to differentiate that is for you to decide through mindfulness, through journaling, through whatever it is. I think we all know what attention looks like, right? It's easy to give and get attention. It is. There are a million people out there who you might be compatible with, right? There's a million people who you get along with, who are chill, who are funny. I think it's more of a reflection of the fact that a lot of people have lowered their bar for what connection looks like to only be at a place of, are they nice, kind, funny, do they communicate? You deserve a lot more than that in a relationship. You deserve all of that, of course, and you deserve the attention that comes along with it. But attention is not connection. Anyone can give you attention. You can give anyone attention, and I think we can prove that for ourselves. We have to define what connection looks like. And I could sit here and spot off ideas of what connection looks like, but I think the gift of life is that you get to decide what it means for you. Because I can feel connected in one way, and that person can say, just because you feel connected with me doesn't mean I feel connected with you. So that's why we need to learn to differentiate that. And you know, to give practical examples, feeling connected means feeling understood. It's empathy. It's all these things. But we have to differentiate between attention. You know, it comes along with like love bombing, making promises. Like, you know, there's flip sides of all these things, right? You might think attention in the form of someone making a promise is tremendous. Connection would say, do they actually keep the promise, right? We have to draw a line between intention and action. You know, interest and consistency. That is, when we're able to do that, that is how we draw the line between what a interest looks like and what connection feels like. And to be able to differentiate between the two, we have to look at actions and actions alone. Because interest is usually just words. Connection is usually verbs. So I think somewhere in between there, that's the answer.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think for myself, like attention is always like buying the nice thing. Oh wow, look at you you got yourself a pair of Gucci slippers on or whatever it is. Like you get some attention. Connection is like, for me now is, oh, this person knows who I am at my core, and they appreciate and accept me, and they love that version of me, which is me, which is not someone I'm trying to be. And so for me, that's how, when you ask that question, that's just how how I kind of differentiated the two. Case, I got one more question for you before we hop into our 3 rapid fire questions, and it's maybe it's a journaling prompt, I don't know, but it's how does Case Kenny want to be remembered?
Ooh, how do I want to be remembered? I would say, oh man, it's a good question. I mean, I want to be remembered as someone who does the difficult things, but that's more about me, right? I would say, it's somewhere along the lines of leaving a legacy of helping people come back to the truth that they know, but that they've forgotten. Like, I think that's my purpose in life, is to help people simplify their life, quiet the noise by coming back to these human truths. Everything we talked about here is not breaking this isn't, crazy stuff. These are things that we intuitively know, but life does this thing where we forget. So I think I want to be remembered as someone who helps lead people back to their truth. As much as that is a cliche, I think it's sorely needed. And if I do that for one person or 10 million people, that would make me happy to be remembered as such.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. All right, so we got 3 rapid fire questions for you. The first one is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given, or a favorite quote? But I kind of want best piece of advice because you're the quote master himself. You've got a million of them, so I'd love to hear just the best piece of advice that you've been given.
Yeah, I would say, someone asked me this the other day, and I thought a lot about it then, and so I've got a quick answer here. It was actually from Reddit. I spend a lot of time on Reddit. I would much rather read random people on Reddit than Tony Robbins. No offense to Tony Robbins. But I like regular freaking people who have gems of wisdom that they don't even realize. And there was a quote on Reddit where it was like, what's your best advice? And the person said this. It's the only place I've ever seen it on the internet. So I'm pretty sure this random internet user said it and then dipped. And all the person said was, the difference between a head full of regret and a head full of memories is your ability to forgive yourself. And that quote just, kickstarted everything for me as far as forgiveness. What is self-forgiveness? How can I forgive myself? I would much rather have a head full of memories than regret. So for me, that's my
What's
best
the Reddit
advice.
thread? I
gotta find this person.
Now I gotta find this thread.
Google that. I think you'll find the thread, or you'll find where I've mentioned it before in like blog posts. You'll find it.
All right. The next one is, if you could have dinner with anyone in the world, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Probably Jerry Seinfeld for 2 reasons. One, he's the basis of all my humor, but I've actually referenced him a lot in my episodes. He's got a lot of like sneaky life advice that he's snuck in. Humor is often the best delivery mechanism for deep truth. So I would say Jerry. He's alive. He's still kicking it. So maybe I'll try try to schmooze my way into his inner circle somehow.
Could have fooled me. Life advice found from Seinfeld. I got to rewatch the show, I guess.
Yeah, give it a rewatch.
Pay more attention.
You'll definitely have to dig deep for it, but it's there, I promise.
Yeah.
The last one is just like, what do you like to do in your free time? What are your hobbies? What have you picked up since moving to the Sunshine State?
Oh, the Sunshine State. I mean, I do a lot of music. I like music. There's a club here called Space, which is this crazy club that's open weird hours. So, like, my girlfriend and I will get up at 6 in the morning and we'll go to this club, and it goes until like 2 in the afternoon. Nothing crazy. We'll have like a beer and a espresso, and we'll just dance, like stuff like that. Do a lot of biking, a lot of walking, a lot of running, a lot of lifting. A lot of great people down here. So I generally decompress with music in some form. Pretty basic stuff.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Case, for coming on, for sharing not only your story but your wisdom. I know I can't say this often on this podcast, but I learned a lot in a short period of time. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Of course.
Thanks
for having me. Yep.